The most dangerous thing on the African savanna is not the predator with the largest teeth. It is the mother who has nothing left to lose. She has been walking for 6 kilometers, not retreating, not hunting, not lost. Walking with the deliberate, ground-covering stride of an animal that has decided something. An animal moving through the world with the specific, frightening clarity of purpose that grief sometimes produces. The dry season grass bends around her. The termite mounds stand motionless in the early heat. Somewhere behind her, a continent of biological history watches without intervening. She stops, not from exhaustion, not from fear. She stops the way a door closes, with the finality of arrival. Beneath a canopy of fever trees, she lowers herself to the ochre earth, and she sets down what she has been carrying. 4 legs, enormous ears, a coat of ochre, black and white, the unmistakable mosaic patterning of Lycaon pictus, the African wild dog, one of the continent's most visually striking carnivores. The pup hits the ground, wobbles, steadies. It turns around. It looks up at the animal that has just transported it across 6 kilometers of open African grassland, and it does the only thing a 4-week-old wild dog knows how to do. It waits. Here is the thing that stops everyone who has ever documented it on camera. The grip. Consider what a lion does to prey. The skull compressed, the spine broken, fast, efficient, biomechanically final. Consider what a lion does with a large kill, the shoulder or the throat gripped, the carcass dragging through the dust. These are the grips of predation. They are the architecture of ending. What this lioness used for 6 kilometers was something categorically different. She used the scruff grip, the fold of loose skin behind the ears, lifted with what can only be described as surgical precision. The carried animal suspended clear of the ground, the pressure calibrated to exactly the threshold between holding and harming. It is the grip a lioness uses to carry a cub, and this was not a cub. This was the natural prey species of her kind, a pup belonging to a family of animals with whom lions have existed in open, documented adversarial relationship for longer than modern human memory. And she carried it without crushing it, for 6 kilometers, in the grip of a mother. What does that tell us about the architecture of instinct? What does it reveal about the distance between what an animal is built to do and what an animal actually does? To understand the answer, you have to go back 3 days. You have to go back to loss. The grassland around the eastern boundary of the pride's territory has a particular quality in the dry season, a pale amber stillness that holds the cool of night longer than it should. At dawn, the light moves across it slowly, as though the landscape itself is reluctant to begin. It was in this light, on the edge of the wetlands, that she spent those 3 days walking. Not hunting, not sleeping for more than an hour at a time. In the behavioral science of large carnivores, this is a documented response, a state called locomotor restlessness that follows reproductive loss, in which the body moves because stillness has become physiologically intolerable. The hormones of motherhood do not switch off at the moment of loss. They have half-lives. They linger in the chemistry of the blood with nowhere to go, searching for the stimuli that would organize them, finding none. The body walks because the body is full of signals that have lost their object. She was 5 years old. In the biology of African lions, 5 is the year of peak capacity, peak muscle mass, peak hunting intelligence, peak social establishment. For a female with stable territory and living cubs, 5 is the beginning of the best years a lion will ever experience. She had none of that. Her first litter arrived 2 seasons earlier. 3 cubs, 2 females and a male, born in a shallow rock den at the eastern territorial edge. She nursed them through 11 weeks of the wet season, through the abundance and the mud, and the slow emergence of 3 small lives into a world that was, for those weeks, manageable. Then a coalition of nomadic males crossed the boundary. The takeover lasted less than a morning. New males, new genetics, a biological protocol refined across millions of years of evolutionary pressure that functions with the cold efficiency of a law. Incoming males cannot reproduce with females nursing another male's cubs. The cubs are killed. The females return to estrus on average 8 months sooner following loss. Evolution built this incentive into the mathematics of large carnivore reproduction. It is documented across populations, across decades of field observation, across multiple African ecosystems. Studies running from the Serengeti to the Okavango have estimated this dynamic accounts for roughly a quarter of all lion cub deaths in the first year of life. She was hunting 3 kilometers away when it happened. She returned to a pride reorganized around new authority and to a den that was empty. What she did afterward, the extended searching, the calls into empty space, the refusal to eat for days, mirrors a behavioral cluster documented in mothers across mammalian species. Whether it constitutes grief in the way humans use that word is a question science handles with appropriate caution. What is not in question is the precision with which the biology of motherhood persisted inside her body long after the cubs were gone. She moved forward. Animals move forward because continuation is the only biological option available. And 11 months later, she carried a second litter. She was different the second time, more careful in ways that feel almost painful to observe, denning in a granite fissure far from the pride's center, a narrow crack accessible from one direction only, nursing in isolation, hunting only at night within 2 kilometers, returning before first light. The shape of the threat had been learned. The behavior had adjusted. A hyena clan found the den at 3 weeks. They had been tracking the biochemical trace of a nursing female, a scent signature that hyenas have evolved specifically to follow, with the patient, methodical competence of animals who have learned that a lioness with very young cubs is an opportunity waiting for the right window. They came at dawn. She was away. She came back at a trot, that particular driven, urgent trot of an animal who has scented something wrong from a distance, and slowed as she reached the fissure. She lowered her head into the crack. She sat in front of those rocks for 11 hours without moving. 3 days later, she found the wild dog pup in the amber grass. The pup had been in that grass for at least 18 hours. Its pack, 11 adults, had been broken by a lion coalition near the western edge of the territory 4 days before. 2 adults killed in the initial charge, the rest scattered. Among the dead was the alpha female, the pup's mother, and the pack's only breeding female. What this means in the social architecture of African wild dogs cannot be overstated. Lycaon pictus operates one of the most sophisticated cooperative breeding systems in the carnivore world. Every adult in the pack contributes, returning from hunts to regurgitate pre-digested protein for the young, standing guard at the den, feeding the pups before feeding themselves. The system is built on collective investment in a single set of offspring. It is one of the most efficient, most generous reproductive strategies in African wildlife. It is also entirely dependent on the presence of adults. A 4-week-old pup without adults is, on the savannah, simply meat the scavengers haven't located yet. This one had not been located. It had crawled into the long grass and remained there, its body burning through reserves it could not replenish on a timeline measured in hours. She scented it from 15 meters. She stopped. She lowered her head. Wild dog, young, alone. Every element of that identification should have been irrelevant, or worse, lions and wild dogs occupy one of the continent's oldest adversarial relationships. Lions steal wild dog kills with such regularity that wild dog packs have evolved specific alarm calls for lion proximity. Wild dogs select den sites partly based on defensibility against lions. When lions encounter wild dogs, it is a negotiation of power. It is not tender. The pup looked up at her. It did not run. Perhaps instinct understood that flight would accelerate what stillness might delay. It sat in the amber grass, 2 kilograms of spotted fur, enormous ears slightly folded, body perfectly still, and it looked at the animal whose species had been a threat to its kind for longer than memory. She lowered her head further. She spent close to a minute scenting the pup from crown to tail. A slow, thorough investigation that carried in it something unmistakable if you watch long enough. The hornbill above them called once and went quiet. The grass moved. She opened her jaws. She positioned her mouth at the scruff of the pup's neck. She lifted, she turned north, and she walked. But the grip is not just a physical fact. The grip is a question. Why that grip, with that precision, toward that animal? Predator instinct does not produce the scruff carry. Prey capture instinct does not produce it. Territorial instinct does not produce it. Only one behavioral system in a lion's neurological architecture generates the scruff carry. The maternal system, activated, searching for a recipient, finding one in the last place the evolutionary logic of her species would have predicted. Speed wins hunts. The scruff grip wins something else entirely. The next layer of this story is not about strength. It is about what happens inside a brain when loss opens a space that biology cannot leave empty. Some of the most powerful forces in nature are invisible. They don't move through muscle or across terrain. They move through blood. And in the 48 hours that follow the lioness's arrival at the seasonal streambed, a dry season hollow flanked by fever trees, invisible from the open plain on three sides, chosen with the precision of an animal that carries a map of safety inside its body. Those invisible forces reveal something about the architecture of mammalian behavior that changes how you understand everything you have observed so far. She set the pup down in the sand. It landed, steadied, looked up at her. Then it walked toward her, not away, toward. It pressed its small body against her foreleg, into the warm hollow between her leg and her chest, and it closed its eyes. She looked down at it. Her tail moved once. She lowered herself to the earth, and the pup climbed onto her paw and slept. To understand what this produces inside a lioness's nervous system, you have to understand the hormonal architecture of recent motherhood. She was not lactating. Her milk had come in twice and receded twice. But the hormonal state of a female who has nursed does not resolve cleanly. Prolactin, the hormone of milk production and parental bonding, remains elevated for weeks following loss. Oxytocin, the hormone that fires during physical contact with young, does not require active nursing to operate. These compounds are not passive. They seek triggers. They are designed to respond to a specific sensory vocabulary: smallness, rounded skull, uncoordinated movement, the high-pitched vocalizations of the very young. Here is the critical biological fact. These systems do not include a category for species. They have a category for young and vulnerable and present. And the wild dog pup, with its oversized ears and its 2-kilogram body and its absolute dependence, satisfied every criterion in that category with a precision that seems almost intentional. The hormonal system responded to the signal. The signal was unmistakable. The system did not know, could not know, that the signal was coming from an animal it had no evolutionary framework for protecting. This is not sentimentality. This is peer-reviewed neuroscience applied to a lioness in a dry streambed. Prolactin and oxytocin are the established hormonal drivers of maternal behavior initiation across mammalian species. They respond to sensory cues, not to species identity. The brain doesn't ask the question we would ask. The brain asks only, is this young? Is this here? Is this in need? The pup answered yes to all three. The system activated. She began to groom it. The rough tongue from the crown of its skull downward, the slow and obsessive attention of a mother cleaning a cub. The pup submitted with the limp trust of an animal that has not yet learned the full vocabulary of danger. And in that streambed, in the shade of the fever trees, in the silence of a dry African afternoon, something that had no name in the behavioral literature of this species settled around both of them like dust. The pride arrived on the second day. 7 females and 3 subadult males moving through the streambed in the pride's ordinary rhythms, and among them, a battle-scarred 8-year-old dominant female, broad-headed, heavy-muscled, carrying in her body the authority of an animal who has spent years inside the politics of lion social structure. She descended the bank alone. She approached the pup. She investigated it with the careful attention of an animal encountering a categorical problem. This is neither prey, nor cub, nor threat, nor ally, and the behavioral system that organizes the world into those categories had no clean folder for what she was looking at. The pup made its begging call, the rapid, high-pitched twitter that wild dog pups direct at adults, a sound that carries the biological weight of, "I know what you are supposed to do for me." But the dominant female had no neural framework to decode it. It was sound without meaning, an alarm in a language she had never been built to hear. She looked at the lioness. The lioness lay still and allowed the pup to be seen. The dominant female turned and walked back up the bank. Over the following days, every member of the pride performed a version of this interaction: investigation, categorical confusion, withdrawal. The pup was neither accepted nor expelled. It existed in the pride's social landscape the way an anomaly exists inside any complex system, generating uncertainty, triggering no clean response, occupying an ambiguous space that the collective, without apparent deliberation, chose not to resolve. For the pup, this ambiguity was protection. It had been claimed by someone. It smelled of her hormones, her grooming, her den site. That scent was a border the pride instinctively did not cross. But instinct has limits, and the limits were becoming urgent. At 4 weeks, a wild dog pup requires high-fat, species-specific milk. She could not provide it. She lay on her side in the nursing posture, the specific bodily arrangement of a female offering nourishment, and the pup searched for a long time before its small head dropped. The milk was not there. The instinct to offer was intact. The biological capacity had been closed by loss. She did the next thing available to her. She hunted. That evening she killed a scrub hare close to the streambed and carried it back whole, the way she would have carried prey back for cubs. She dropped it in front of the pup. The pup investigated, mouthed the fur, backed away. Wild dog pups at 4 weeks cannot process intact solid food independently. In a functioning pack, adults return from hunts having already begun digestion. They regurgitate a warm, soft protein slurry that the pup's developing system can manage. A whole hare, with its skin and bones and the full intact architecture of a small mammal, was beyond what the pup could navigate. She paused. She looked at the hare. She bit into it. What happened next is the part that changes the way you understand what instinct actually is. She chewed, briefly, imprecisely, and then she mouthed a small piece of pre-torn flesh toward the pup, dropping it directly at its feet. It was not regurgitation. It bore only a passing structural resemblance to what a wild dog adult would do. But in its fundamental intention, "I have processed this, now take it, now eat." It was close enough that the pup understood it. The pup ate. It was improvised. It was imprecise. It was not adequate nutrition. But on the African savanna, not dying today is a functional survival strategy. And with torn hair in its belly, the pup was not dying. The hyenas came on the 3rd night, a small group following the scent trail of the kill carcass. The patient, methodical movement of opportunists who have calculated that the combination of meat and vulnerable young represents a favorable ratio of risk to reward. They arrived at the streambed bank in full darkness, their silhouettes cutting clean shapes against the stars, their territorial whoops carrying across the still air. The pup was asleep against her flank. She was not asleep. She was on her feet before the first vocalization completed, and she placed herself between the bank and the pup with the specific geometry of maternal defense, body angled to cover the maximum ground between the threat and the young, stance low, weight forward, every muscle organized around a single calculation. The lead hyena, a large female, began to descend. What followed lasted approximately 4 minutes. The lead female was driven back into the sand with a single strike. The sound she made was not the full territorial roar of a pride dispute. It was shorter, sharper, lower in frequency. a sound documented specifically in maternal defense contexts, carrying an acoustic signature that triggers a categorically different threat response in the animals that hear it. It is not a challenge, it is a declaration of consequence. The remaining 5 hyenas scattered. They reformed at the tree line, 40 meters out. They waited, they watched, they calculated. She walked back down the bank. She lowered herself beside the pup, which had woken and was standing with ears flat, staring at the darkness. She licked the top of its head. The hyenas did not come down. By morning, they were gone. Something in the savannah's social calculus had been exposed. Not unusual in itself, maternal defense behavior is among the most documented in large carnivore science. What is unusual is the object of that defense. The cost-benefit mathematics of the hyena's withdrawal was driven not by the biological value of a wild dog pup, but by the response of the animal standing over it. She had assigned it the value she would have assigned a cub, and the savannah responded to that assignment as though it were law. The system had not been fooled. The system had been told. What neither the hyenas nor the pride nor the landscape could have anticipated was what waited at the waterhole on the 5th morning. Because what instinct had built in those 5 days, the grip, the grooming, the improvised feeding, the 4 minutes in the dark, instinct had not built alone. Something else had been building alongside it, and at the waterhole it would walk to the edge of the water and look across, and the full complexity of what had happened in that streambed would step into the light. Above this point, survival stops being about what you protect. It becomes about what you release. The first weapon in nature is not strength. It is not speed. It is not venom or camouflage or the architecture of teeth. It is the capacity to change what you are protecting and why. On the morning of the 5th day, something had shifted in the pup. Not in its size, which remained underweight, or in its coordination, which still produced the sprawling tumbles of very young animals learning the geography of their own limbs. What had shifted was subtler and more significant. It startled less, it moved with less hesitation. In the specific language of animal behavioral development, it had begun to feel safe, which is not a small thing, which is, on the African savanna, the distance between an animal that survives and one that doesn't. It followed her out of the streambed. She walked at her ordinary morning pace across 200 meters of open grassland toward the waterhole, a seasonal depression in the clay, reduced by the dry season to perhaps 20 meters across. She drank. The pup came to the water's edge beside her, its muzzle barely clearing the surface, and drank for a long time. Above them, a vervet monkey alarm called twice, then went silent. She raised her head. Her ears turned forward, her nostrils widened. The body organized, not dramatically, not into the full compression of a hunting posture, but in the particular assembled way of an animal that has identified something requiring assessment. Across the waterhole, half visible in the tall grass on the far bank, a male wild dog stood watching them. Adult. Lean. The distinctive tricolour patterning of Lycaon pictus across his coat, large rounded ears oriented forward, body positioned with the stillness of an animal deciding something important. Based on his condition, the leanness of extended solitary movement, the careful watchfulness of an individual without social backing, he was almost certainly a disperser. A young adult male separated from a natal pack, moving through the landscape in search of new social affiliation. He had been alone for some time. He had, almost certainly, scented the pup before he saw it. He made no aggressive signal. He did not advance. He simply looked at the pup across the water with the fixed, concentrated attention of an animal whose experience had not prepared it to interpret what it was seeing. The pup looked back at him. And then, the moment that makes this story different from any other, the pup made the begging call. That rapid, high-pitched twitter. The call that wild dog pups direct at adults for food, for contact, for recognition. The call that carries the biological weight of, I know what you are. I know what you are supposed to be to me. The call that, in 5 days of life in the streambed, had produced only the careful, puzzled attention of animals who could hear it but had no framework to answer it. The male wild dog's ears came sharply forward. His tail, which had been low and uncertain, lifted. He took one step toward the water. She was between them in under a second. She did not roar. She did not charge. She moved into the space between the dog and the pup, and she stopped. Body angled broadside, her full mass deployed in the clean, unambiguous language that large mammals use to communicate without words. This is where you stop. Every visible element of her said it. The wild dog stopped. 30 seconds. The waterhole held absolutely still. The pup stood behind her hindquarters, still calling, peering around the edge of her body at the dog on the far bank. Two species with millions of years of ecological history between them, organized around a 2-kilogram animal who belonged fully to neither. And then she stepped to the side, not back, not away, laterally, out of the direct line between the pup and the dog, while remaining close enough to cover the distance in a stride. She kept her gaze on the dog. She did not look at the pup. She did not call it back. She simply made room. The wild dog lowered himself slowly onto his belly in the grass, ears forward, tail dropped, no aggression. He waited. The pup walked to the edge of the water. It looked across. It crossed. What followed across the next 4 hours does not have clean language in the behavioral literature, and this is not for lack of precision. It is because what happened exists at the very edge of what the categories we use for animal behavior were designed to describe. The wild dog did not lead the pup away. He did not carry it. He moved parallel to it, matching its pace, stopping when it stopped, investigating the same patches of ground with the close muzzled attention of an animal, still determining what the situation is and what it requires of him. The behavioral register between them was not play. It was more careful than play, more tentative. The specific quality of two animals from entirely different worlds, discovering, with caution that had nothing performative about it, that the other one was not a threat. She followed at 30 meters. She matched their pace. When they stopped, she stopped. When they moved, she moved. She did not close the distance. By midday, the three of them were resting in the shade of a stand of whistling thorn. The pup between two adults, one lion, one wild dog, the pup's small sleeping body framed from either side by creatures that the savannah had never organized around a shared object before. The sun moved overhead. The grass moved. The termite mounds threw their long shadows across the pale earth. It was the most ordinary-looking thing. No one who has spent serious time studying animal behavior will give you a simple explanation for what this was. Cross-species behavioral events are among the most contested territory in the field, and rightfully so. The temptation to impose human narrative onto them is powerful, and the risk of doing so is real. We cannot access the interior of an animal's life. We cannot know what she experienced in 3 days of walking the eastern grassland after her second litter died. We cannot know what the pup understood about the animal that carried it, or what the male wild dog calculated in the 30 seconds he lay in the grass at the water's edge. What we have is the behavior. 6 kilometers with the scruff grip, 5 days in a streambed, 4 minutes in the dark against hyenas, 30 seconds at a waterhole, 1 step to the side. What we have, above all else, is that lateral step, that one sideways movement, neither surrender nor expulsion, but something more precise than either. A door held slightly open. A situation permitted to develop in a direction that instinct had not, apparently, locked shut. If you tried to describe it in the simplest possible terms, you would say, she moved aside. There is documented precedent for this. The most widely known example comes from Kenya's Samburu National Reserve, beginning in 2001. A solitary lioness documented over 3 years, who repeatedly adopted and protected oryx calves, natural prey of her own species, starving rather than hunt while she guarded them, driving off other predators with the full behavioral repertoire of maternal defense. Lion expert Dr. Craig Packer of the University of Minnesota's Lion Research Center noted that her solitary condition and apparent social isolation likely amplified the hormonal drivers of her attachment. What she did was filmed extensively, broadcast to a global audience, and never fully explained by the scientific community before she was last sighted in February 2004. These events exist. They are rare. They are not fully understood. But they tell us something with more certainty than any single theory. The systems we use to describe animal behavior are more flexible at their edges than the clean language of instinct, biological imperative, and hardwiring suggests. Under specific conditions of hormonal state, individual circumstance, and something that may or may not deserve a longer word than opportunity, the behavior of a single animal can exceed the predictions of the category it belongs to. Not infinitely, not arbitrarily, but measurably, observably, in ways that long-lens cameras capture in footage that stops everyone who watches it. She was a lioness. Lycaon pictus has been prey, competitor, and adversary to her species for longer than the current configuration of the African savanna has existed. None of that was erased at the waterhole. It was present in every second of the 30 seconds she stood between the dog and the pup. The biology of that adversarial history ran through her chemistry, her posture, her instinct. And then she moved aside. What this movement was, precisely, is worth saying carefully. It was not abandonment. The pup would not have survived to adulthood on what a lioness could provide alone. The gap between what she could offer and what the pup actually needed, species-specific milk, regurgitated protein, the warm, complicated social architecture of a functioning pack, was biological, and it was real. A male wild dog, if he remained, represented something different, something closer to what the developmental biology of the pup actually required. The lateral step was perhaps the most sophisticated version of care available to her in that moment. The care that asks, not what do I need to keep, but what does this need that I cannot give? She returned to the pride gradually over the following weeks. She hunted, she slept, she resumed the rhythms of her life with the specific, forward-moving quality of animals for whom continuation is not a philosophical choice, but a biological condition. Whether she remembered the pup, in any meaningful sense of the word remembered, is not something behavioral science has a method for measuring. What can be described, observed, documented, cross-referenced with everything known about the neuroscience of mammalian motherhood and the social biology of both species, is the grip itself, its precision, its care. The anatomical location chosen, the pressure calibrated, the 6 kilometers covered with that pressure held exactly right. The grip was the grip of a mother, and the animal in that grip was not her offspring, was not her species, was, by every biological definition available to her kind, her adversary. She carried it anyway, she fed it, she defended it in the dark. And then, at the edge of a waterhole in the dry season light, she did the hardest thing the behavioral evidence suggests she was capable of doing. She made room for it to go back to what it was.